might think you've got a solid read on the people around you. You're sure you can spot toxic behavior, heavy vibes, or when someone's pushing the limits of what's okay. But what if the real threats aren't loud or obvious? What if the ones who hurt you most don't look like villains at all? They might be sweet, likable, maybe even part of your family. And while you're busy guarding yourself against the clear red flags, you might unknowingly be letting in something much more dangerous, the unconscious parts of others seeping into your own psyche. This was the life's work of Carl Gustav Jung. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he explores how most of what drives us isn't even in our conscious control. And that goes for everyone, not just you. That's where things get risky, because when someone is totally unaware of their inner darkness, that shadow doesn't just disappear, it looks for someone else to latch onto. And sometimes, that someone ends up being you. Ever walked away from a conversation feeling completely emotionally drained? Ever been blamed for something that wasn't your fault? Or maybe someone suddenly turned you into the hero of their story, dragging you into their chaos. Jung called this projection. When someone unconsciously dumps parts of themselves, they refuse to face onto someone else. At that point, you're no longer seen for who you are. You become a symbol, a villain, a savior, a threat, a fantasy. But here's the kicker. None of those things are actually you. The scariest part is that you often don't even realize what's happening. You think you're helping, being compassionate, being the bigger person. But really, you're getting sucked into a world of emotional mess that isn't yours. You're trying to fix problems that never belong to you, trapped in a mental space shaped by someone else's issues. And it's not always because someone's out to get you. Jung was clear. The real danger doesn't come from consciously manipulative people. It comes from those who are unconscious, unaware, disconnected from themselves. These people live behind masks, ruled by trauma, complexes, and buried desires. They're not evil, but they are dangerous. Because their danger is subtle. It slips in quietly, through loaded silences, passive-aggressive jabs, and everyday moments. And before you know it, you start doubting yourself. When you lose touch with your own mental reality, you slowly get pulled into their shadow. Maybe this hits close to home. Maybe it's happening in your relationship, a friendship, at work, or even with family. And maybe you've been blaming yourself, wondering what's wrong with you. The truth? Nothing. But there is something seriously off about being used as a dumping ground for someone else's unresolved stuff. This video will break down 6 types of people Jung would flag as emotionally dangerous. These aren't bad people with evil plans. They're folks ruled by forces inside them they don't understand. That's what makes them so harmful. We'll walk you through Jung's actual concepts, terms, and insights, straight from his work like Aion, the Ego and the Unconscious, and Archetypes and the collective unconscious, so you can spot these patterns in others, and maybe even in yourself. So, are you ready? Take a breath and come with us. But fair warning, after this, you might not see the people around you, or even yourself, the same way again. Imagine being with someone who blames you for every feeling they have, who turns your presence into a trigger, who makes you responsible for emotional storms you didn't start. At first, they seem deep, vulnerable, even soulful, but eventually, you notice you're stuck in a war zone that doesn't belong to you, and you're already losing. This is the unconscious manipulator, someone unaware of their inner pain, projecting it onto others just to stay afloat mentally. Jung once said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will meet as fate." Sometimes that fate has a name, a face, and sits across the dinner table from you. The unconscious manipulator is drowning in repressed memories, unhealed wounds, and emotional debris. Instead of turning inward, they aim all that unresolved pain at you. You become the screen where their inner chaos plays out. Jung believed projection is a built-in part of being human. We all do it. But when we don't realize it's happening, it becomes toxic. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he describes projection as a kind of mental blindness, a trap where we stop seeing people as they really are and start turning them into symbols of our own hidden baggage. And that's exactly what the unconscious manipulator does. They're not really seeing you. What they're reacting to is a part of themselves they've lost touch with, something they've pushed so deep they can only recognize it in someone else. These people often carry a victim mindset. Everything that happens to them, always someone else's fault. If they're angry, you must have triggered it. If they're down, clearly you let them down. If they feel small, it's because they think you believe you're better than them. And all of this plays out so subtly, you start second-guessing yourself. Was I too harsh? Did I mess up? Am I the toxic one here? That's how manipulation sneaks in, not through shouting or big scenes, but through quiet, emotional cues that mess with your head. It's unconscious, silent, and incredibly powerful. What makes it even trickier is that these people often come across as incredibly likable. They're charming, emotionally tuned in, magnetic, in a way that makes you want to help them, understand them, maybe even save them. But what you're really doing is draining your own emotional reserves, trying to rescue someone who won't even look inward. The harder you try, the deeper you fall. Jung warned us that these projection patterns are particularly dangerous because they turn you into a symbol, hero, villain, betrayer, parent, anything except your real self. When you're caught in that symbolic role, you're living in someone else's illusion. You stop being seen for who you are and instead become a blurry reflection of their unconscious mind. So how do you protect yourself from someone like this? By becoming aware. You have to learn to spot the patterns, to cut those invisible emotional strings pulling you into their story. Most importantly, keep checking in with yourself. Are these feelings truly yours, or are they something you've absorbed from someone else? Because unconscious manipulators don't break into your world forcefully. They slip in through your kindness, through your desire to care. Once you've seen the pattern, the next layer is understanding how it can get even more hidden. Under the mask of the persona. This is the person who not only projects, but completely lives through a carefully crafted image of who they want to be seen as. In the next part, we'll look deeper into this idea, the bearer of the persona, and why Jung saw it as one of the biggest psychological threats. Because while unconscious manipulators throw their pain onto others, people stuck behind the persona can drag you into a whole fabricated world. One where even you start losing sight of your real self. If this is striking a chord, hit that subscribe button and stick around. We appreciate your support. Not all psychological danger comes from wild or extreme behavior. Sometimes it hides behind what seems too perfect. That always-on smile, the polished way of speaking, the image that seems too flawless to be real. We live in a world that values appearances more than authenticity, and for Jung, this was a serious issue. When someone identifies too deeply with their public image or persona, the social mask we all wear to fit into the world, they start to disconnect from who they really are. And when someone loses themselves behind that mask, they don't just distort their own reality, they start warping yours too. In The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung described the persona as not who a person actually is, but who they and others think they are. It's a role shaped by family, society, and professional expectations. And on its own, there's nothing wrong with it. We all wear different masks depending on where we are, at work, with friends, at home. But things get dangerous when someone starts believing that mask is all they are. When the mask fuses with the face, everything real, emotions, doubts, vulnerability, gets shoved deep down into the basement of the mind. The bearer of the persona becomes a master of surface-level living. They say what's expected, do the right things, and steer clear of confrontation. But underneath that well-managed exterior, their inner self is falling apart. The more they cling to the image, the more they suffocate their real identity. And eventually, that repression comes at a cost. If you've ever spent time around someone like this, you probably felt it. Something feels off. You can't quite explain it, but there's no realness in your interactions. Everything feels staged. And worse, they'll expect you to play along. They want you to keep up the act, to meet their standards, to never break the illusion. And if you do, if you get emotional, show uncertainty, or reveal pain, they pull away, get weird, shut down. Anything that reminds them of what they've buried inside is just too much. Jung warned that clinging too tightly to the persona is one of the biggest obstacles to becoming your true self, a process he called individuation. For him, the real danger starts when someone becomes hypnotized by their role, mistaking the part they play for who they are. And that's exactly where the real psychological risk lies. When someone lives just to be accepted, praised, or seen in a certain light, they become a prisoner of their own image. Everything real inside them, emotions, thoughts, desires, gets pushed down and buried behind the mask they wear. And if you're close to someone like this, it starts to affect you too. You find yourself second-guessing what you say, toning yourself down, hiding parts of who you are because they don't fit with what's expected. Before you know it, you've got your own mask on, just to keep the peace. Being around someone like that doesn't just feel fake, it's infectious. But there's something even deeper and more dangerous, because when someone keeps their feelings, thoughts, and wants bottled up for too long, they don't just vanish. They build up. They sit in the unconscious, fermenting, until one day they erupt. That's where we move into the realm of the repressed shadow, the darker part of ourselves that's been denied for so long. It finally explodes. There's a certain kind of person who seems always composed. Polite, well-mannered, in control. They never raise their voice, always appear calm, and seem to be living by some unshakable standard. But behind that polished surface is a storm waiting to break loose. Everything they consider wrong, messy, or inappropriate doesn't get worked through. It just gets shoved down. And that's where the real danger begins. This is the heart of what Jung called the repressed shadow. When someone is so committed to being good or light, they end up being consumed by their own darkness. Jung spent a lot of time studying this. In Aion, he wrote that the shadow is everything you refuse to admit about yourself, yet it shows up anyway, often without you even realizing it. It's not some outside evil force. It's not someone else. It's the jealousy you don't acknowledge, the anger you won't accept, the sexuality you hide, the ambition you pretend isn't there. And, as Jung put it, what you don't bring into awareness ends up running your life, and you'll just call it fate. At first, the owner of the repressed shadow doesn't look threatening. They might even seem admirable, disciplined, respectful, helpful, but there's usually something off. They can't stand when others show vulnerability. They flinch at raw emotions. They get annoyed at people who are spontaneous or intense. You can feel the tension, even if they never say a word. They're always tightly wound until they're not. And when they finally snap, it's overwhelming. These folks live with a constant grip on their emotions. They don't let themselves feel, so they judge others who do. They don't allow mistakes, so they criticize anyone who messes up. They become rigid, hyper-moral, controlling, all in an attempt to keep their inner chaos from spilling out. Jung warned us, the stronger the persona, the deeper the repression. And the more repressed that shadow becomes, the more violent it eventually returns. You see this in people who overreact to small things, who hold grudges forever, who quietly sabotage their own relationships. The classic, difficult person who seems bitter, angry, always critical, and no one really knows why. But the answer lies in their shadow, the parts of themselves they've never acknowledged or accepted. Here's what matters most. The shadow isn't all bad. Jung was clear about that. It also holds your hidden potential, your buried talents, your strength, your creativity. But when you ignore it, all of that power turns toxic, and that poison spreads into your relationships, your environment, and especially into the people closest to you. Living with someone like this is like tiptoeing through a minefield. You never know what's going to set them off until it's too late. But this kind of repression doesn't come from nowhere. It's often driven by a need to feel superior, by clinging to a strict moral code that uses guilt like a leash. And that brings us to the next type, the moral controller. This person doesn't just repress their own desires. They make you feel bad for having yours. In the next part, we'll dig into this figure that Jung saw as one of the biggest roadblocks to true psychological freedom. The self-proclaimed guardian of virtue, who behind all the preaching is actually wrestling with their own hidden urges. Not every oppressor uses violence. Some use rules, dogma, and guilt. These are the ones who claim to be motivated by ethics and righteousness, but in reality, they're locking themselves and everyone around them into cages built from shame. Jung knew this pattern all too well. He understood that when morality becomes just a mask, it can be one of the most damaging forms of self-denial. This is the pattern of the moral controller, someone who refuses to face their own shadow and instead projects it onto the people around them. You've probably come across someone like this before. They're quick to judge, constantly pointing out what's wrong in others, yet never seem to stop and take a hard look at themselves. They act like they're the gold standard of how people should behave, not because they truly are, but because they're clinging to a sense of moral superiority, like it's armor. Jung believed that the more we repress, the more we feel the need to project, and the moral controller is the perfect example of that. They turn others into sinners, deviants, or morally broken people, all to avoid acknowledging the parts of themselves they can't accept. Unlike someone who just uses manipulation to get what they want, the moral controller genuinely believes they're doing the right thing. They see themselves as correcting, saving, or guiding others. And that's what makes them even more dangerous. Their judgment is wrapped in the language of concern, good intentions, and fake spiritual wisdom. They'll say things like, "This is for your own good," or "You'll thank me later," or "Someone had to be honest with you." But the truth they're offering is far from objective. It's full of their own unconscious baggage. In Aion, Jung talks at length about the archetypes of Christ and the Antichrist, showing how they represent the unity and division within the self. The moral controller believes they're shining the light, while refusing to admit the darkness within. They offload their shadow onto others to keep up the illusion of being pure, and in doing so, they become blind to the complexity of real human nature. If you're close to someone like this, you might start feeling like you're constantly in the wrong, even when you're just being yourself. It's like you're always under a microscope. You feel judged, watched, and slowly, you start judging yourself too. You begin to bury parts of yourself, your quirks, emotions, even your joy, because they don't fit their version of what's good. Their moral code starts to shape your world, turning it into a cage. This is especially common in rigid environments, families, religious communities, or places where obedience is mistaken for virtue. Jung saw this kind of moral rigidity as a real threat to self-growth. When someone is obsessed with being morally correct, there's usually a big gap in self-awareness. The extreme moralist doesn't want truth. They want control. And if they can't control the world around them, they'll start trying to control the inner lives of the people close to them. But the moral controller isn't the only one being driven by forces they don't understand. There's another type who's even more unpredictable, the complexed individual. While the moralist suppresses and then projects, the complexed person is completely overtaken by what's buried inside. They're not in control of their emotions. Their past is. In the next section, we'll explore what it's like to be around someone like this. Someone who can be warm and kind one moment, then turn cold or furious the next, without even knowing why. If this sounds familiar, and you want to dig deeper, check out my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It unpacks Jung's core ideas and gives you practical ways to understand yourself better. The link's in the pinned comment. Now imagine living with someone who can be incredibly loving and generous one day, then explode with rage, shut down emotionally, or throw wild accusations at you the next. 1 minute, they're full of praise. The next, they twist it into a demand. A joke turns hostile. A kind gesture is seen as a threat. No matter what you do, it feels like you're walking on unstable ground. That's what it's like to be around someone consumed by unconscious complexes. Jung called them complexed individuals. Complexes are powerful emotional triggers formed by past trauma or unresolved pain. They live in the unconscious and can hijack your behavior in an instant. In Psychological Types and the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung explains how these complexes can override a person's awareness, making them react not to the current moment, but to some buried memory or emotional wound. So when someone blows up over what seems like nothing, they're not really responding to you. They're reacting to an old fear, a deep hurt, or an experience they never dealt with. And here's what makes it so hard. It doesn't happen all the time. These emotional outbursts come and go. In between, there are moments of warmth, clarity, and even deep connection. That back and forth creates a toxic cycle that's both confusing and strangely addicting. You start telling yourself, they're not always like this. Sometimes they're amazing. And that's what makes the complex person so hard to walk away from. You never know which version of them you'll get. But what's clear is that until those buried emotions are faced, they'll keep reacting from the past and taking you along for the ride. And that's exactly what keeps you caught in the cycle. Because in between the chaos, there are real moments of love, connection, even joy. But those calm moments are unpredictable and short-lived. Soon, you're right back in the middle of an emotional storm you can't make sense of. So you start to adapt. You try to keep the peace, reshape yourself, shrink your voice. You avoid certain topics. You measure every word You walk on eggshells. Anything to avoid triggering that dark side in them. But here's the harsh truth. That darkness isn't asleep because of you, and it's not your fault when it wakes up. It's always there, simmering under the surface, waiting for the smallest spark to rise and destroy everything around it. Jung believed that when complexes go unacknowledged, they slowly take over the mind. They begin to think for you, feel for you, act for you. For someone consumed by these complexes, this takeover is constant. They might be ruled by deep feelings of inferiority, martyrdom, abandonment, or persecution, each one bringing its own story, emotions, and expectations. And the more you try to keep everything stable, the more you feed into the illusion that you can somehow control the uncontrollable. Being close to someone like this means living in a constant state of tension. There's no emotional ground to stand on. Everything in the present is haunted by old ghosts. And eventually, you start to take on those ghosts yourself. You question your own thoughts, your memories, your emotions. Before you realize it, their unconscious becomes part of your reality too. But the most dangerous part hasn't even hit yet. Because while the complex person swings between emotional highs and lows, there's another type who's even more draining. They don't yell. They don't explode. They don't accuse. Instead, they slowly suck the life out of you. In the final section, we're going to talk about the psychic vampire, the one who feeds on your time, your energy, your compassion, and leaves you completely wiped out. Some people don't want your company. What they really want is your energy, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Not with force or drama, but with subtle manipulation, emotional neediness disguised as love, and constant demands that wear you down. This is the psychic vampire, the most quiet yet most exhausting emotional presence Jung ever warned us about, even if he didn't use that term. In Jung's language, this person represents the unresolved symbiotic bond, a toxic attachment where two people lose their sense of individuality and become entangled as emotional extensions of each other. The psychic vampire thrives in these kinds of relationships. They need you, your attention, your presence, your reassurance, every single day. And behind that need is an emptiness you can't fill, no matter how much you give. You start by being supportive. Then you start giving away your time. Then you find yourself tolerating disrespect, emotional manipulation, even subtle abuse, all in the name of being there for them, until one day you wake up completely drained, unsure where they end, and you begin. It's more than just being tired. It's soul-deep exhaustion, like your very essence is being drained drop by drop, day after day. Jung wrote about people who can't sustain themselves emotionally, so they latch onto others like psychological parasites. It might sound harsh, but it's the truth. The psychic vampire doesn't want to grow. They want someone else to carry them. And the real danger isn't just the exhaustion. It's how this dynamic erodes your sense of self. You start to feel guilty for needing space, selfish for wanting quiet, cold for needing boundaries. Because the psychic vampire is an expert in flipping the script. One minute, they're the victim. The next, they're blaming you. They twist the roles so skillfully that you end up living just to avoid setting them off, just to keep things calm, even though that calm is killing you. But Jung didn't leave us without hope. He believed there was a way out, to make the unconscious conscious, to see the pattern clearly, both in others and in ourselves. Because let's be honest, at some point, we've all played these roles. We've all been someone else's drain, or dumped our pain onto others. We all carry shadow. We all carry wounds. The difference lies in who chooses to face that darkness and who keeps projecting it onto everyone else. This video was meant to be a mirror, a way to see the invisible strings that bind us, the wounds that hurt us, the patterns that keep us unaware. If you've made it this far, it means you're ready. Ready to notice, to name, to break free. And that's where real freedom begins, not by blaming others, but by stepping out of the role of victim and taking back your power over your own inner world. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Which of these patterns have you experienced from others? And which ones do you recognize in yourself? Your honesty might not only shift your own perspective, but also help someone else find clarity. And before you go, one last thing. The next video is a big one. It'll take you even deeper into this journey of self-discovery. Don't miss it. Because the more light we bring into our unconscious, the less it controls our lives. See you there.